Prison Reform and Rehabilitation Programs. The damage was already done by the time anyone admitted the system was failing. Years of violence, isolation, and repeated incarceration had produced the same outcome again and again. Release without change meant return without surprise. Across the United States, 3 institutions became symbols of that cycle: Rikers Island in New York City, San Quentin Rehabilitation Center in California, and Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary in the San Francisco Bay. If stories like this matter to you, subscribing helps us continue examining how prisons shape lives long after the gates close behind them. Rikers Island sits in the East River between Queens and the Bronx, operating as New York City's primary jail complex for pretrial detainees and short-term sentences. Its reputation has long been defined by instability. Unlike state prisons, most people on Rikers have not been convicted of the charges they face. They are held while awaiting trial, often because they cannot afford bail. That distinction shapes everything inside. Programs compete with court dates, legal meetings, and unpredictable lengths of stay. Rehabilitation becomes difficult when no one knows how long someone will remain. By the early 21st century, reports from oversight agencies described high rates of violence, staff shortages, and deteriorating infrastructure. Reform efforts were announced repeatedly, but implementation proved uneven. Educational services exist on the island, especially for younger detainees. New York City law requires schooling for those under 21, and classrooms operate within secure housing units. Yet attendance fluctuates. Court appearances interrupt lessons. Housing transfers disrupt continuity. Some students begin courses they never finish, leaving progress fragmented and incomplete. Vocational training programs have been introduced over the years, offering basic certifications in areas like food service and maintenance. The goal is to provide skills usable immediately after release. But the churn of admissions and discharges limits depth. Many participants leave before completing training cycles. What begins as structured instruction can end abruptly without measurable impact. Mental health services form another pillar of reform attempts. Rikers houses a significant population diagnosed with mental illness, requiring clinical staff and specialized units. Treatment, however, unfolds within a jail environment built primarily for custody. Security procedures often dictate movement, scheduling, and access, constraining consistent therapeutic engagement. Oversight bodies have documented incidents where safety concerns overshadowed programming. When violence rises, lockdowns increase, and programming pauses. Rehabilitation becomes secondary to immediate control. And that tension has defined Rikers for decades. California's San Quentin Rehabilitation Center presents a different model. Located north of San Francisco, it is the state's oldest prison and once housed the largest death row population in the United States. In recent years, state leadership reoriented San Quentin toward rehabilitation, inspired partly by Scandinavian correctional philosophies emphasizing education and normalized living conditions. The shift included expanded access to college-level courses, cognitive behavioral programs, and vocational pathways. Partnerships with universities and nonprofit organizations increased inside the facility. Incarcerated students can earn associate and bachelor's degrees through accredited programs. Classes are taught by qualified instructors, and coursework mirrors that offered on outside campuses. Completion rates have drawn attention from researchers studying recidivism. Data from California has shown lower reoffending rates among participants in sustained educational programs compared to those without access. But transforming a historic maximum security prison is complex. Infrastructure designed for confinement must adapt to spaces for classrooms, workshops, and collaborative learning. Housing redesign proposals have sought to create smaller, more stable units. The intention is to reduce tension and foster accountability within defined groups. Not everyone agrees with the pace or scale of change. Correctional staff unions, victims' rights advocates, and some policymakers question whether safety can be maintained alongside expanded freedoms within the institution. Few people outside the system see the daily balancing act between security protocols and rehabilitative ambition. Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary represents an earlier era entirely. Operating from 1934 to 1963 on an island in San Francisco Bay, it was designed for the most disruptive federal prisoners. Rehabilitation was not its defining mission. Alcatraz emphasized strict discipline, limited privileges, and the deterrent value of isolation from the mainland. Inmates could work in kitchens, laundries, or maintenance roles, but educational and therapeutic programming remained minimal compared to modern standards. The philosophy was clear: order first, reform uncertain. Yet even at Alcatraz, administrators tracked behavior closely. Good conduct earned small privileges, including access to the library and musical instruments. Records from the Bureau of Prisons indicate that many incarcerated there eventually transferred back to other facilities rather than remaining permanently on the island. Alcatraz closed after less than 3 decades, partly due to high operating costs and infrastructure decay. Its legacy, however, shaped public perceptions of maximum security incarceration. Comparing these 3 institutions reveals the evolution of American correctional philosophy. From rigid isolation at Alcatraz to reform-driven experimentation at San Quentin, the purpose of imprisonment has shifted. Rikers Island, meanwhile, remains caught between immediate custodial demands and long-promised structural change. And the question persists: can large, urban jail systems realistically deliver meaningful rehabilitation when detainee populations turn over daily and systemic pressures remain unresolved? The answer may determine not only institutional reputations, but the futures of thousands who pass through their gates each year. Despite decades of reform plans, Rikers Island continues to struggle with consistency in rehabilitation efforts. Programs exist, but daily realities, overcrowding, violence, and limited staffing, often undermine their effectiveness. In recent years, the city has prioritized educational and vocational programming, particularly for younger inmates. Courses range from literacy and GED preparation to computer skills and culinary instruction. Attendance is voluntary, yet participation is encouraged through incentives such as access to recreation, commissary items, and privileges within housing units. For some, these programs represent the only structured routine. Vocational programs aim to teach marketable skills, including plumbing, carpentry, and food service. Partnerships with nonprofits attempt to bridge gaps between institutional training and community employment opportunities. Mental health support remains critical. Rikers houses a disproportionate number of individuals with serious psychiatric conditions. On-site psychologists, social workers, and case managers provide therapy, group sessions, and crisis intervention. Yet treatment often conflicts with the facility's security-driven schedule. Lockdowns, transfers, and disciplinary actions can interrupt therapy, limiting long-term effectiveness and creating a cycle of instability. San Quentin, in contrast, has embraced education as a central component of rehabilitation. Incarcerated students can enroll in college-level programs, earning degrees that directly influence post-release outcomes. Courses cover liberal arts, social sciences, and vocational studies, reflecting an understanding that intellectual engagement can reduce recidivism. Instruction is led by qualified faculty, sometimes drawn from outside universities. Participation extends beyond academics. Cognitive behavioral programs, substance abuse counseling, and anger management classes are integrated into daily schedules, fostering both practical skills and personal insight. Inmates who complete these programs report improved self-esteem and a sense of purpose. Success stories highlight the transformative potential of structured, long-term education within a prison environment. Housing design plays a critical role. Smaller, stable living units allow for focused programs and reduce the tension that arises from overcrowding, creating an environment more conducive to learning and rehabilitation. Yet challenges persist. Staff must balance security concerns with program access, and not all inmates are eligible for every opportunity, leaving gaps in participation and continuity. Alcatraz offers a historical contrast. Its strict regimen emphasized labor and obedience over personal development. Inmates engaged in work assignments such as kitchen duties, laundry, and maintenance, but educational and therapeutic interventions were minimal. Behavioral records were meticulously maintained, with privileges granted for compliance. Music, library access, and recreational activities were rare incentives used to motivate order rather than personal growth. Although the primary goal at Alcatraz was containment and deterrence, these routines provide insight into the roots of modern prison programs, illustrating the evolution from control-focused incarceration to reform-oriented initiatives. Back at Rikers, efforts to introduce vocational and educational programs continue despite systemic barriers. Recidivism remains high, demonstrating the difficulty of reform in short-term detention settings. Case management has become increasingly important. Social workers and counselors attempt to connect detainees with resources that extend beyond the facility, including housing, employment, and mental health care. These transitional programs aim to reduce repeat offenses, but outcomes are mixed. Urban pressures, personal circumstances, and the transient population within Rikers complicate post-release success. San Quentin's structured approach shows a different path. Stable housing, sustained programming, and clear progression opportunities foster accountability and skill building. The contrast emphasizes the influence of environment and policy on rehabilitation. Vocational programs at San Quentin have expanded to include specialized trades, often in partnership with external employers. Inmates gain certifications that can lead directly to employment after release. In parallel, therapeutic programs address mental health and substance use disorders. Group therapy, one-on-one counseling, and peer mentoring are integrated into the daily routine to support long-term stability. Community involvement strengthens these initiatives. Volunteers, educators, and nonprofit organizations provide additional instruction, mentorship, and reintegration planning, bridging the gap between incarceration and release. Despite these successes, friction between security priorities and rehabilitation goals remains. High-security incidents or institutional tension can temporarily suspend programming, reminding participants and staff that control often trumps development. Alcatraz, though no longer operational, continues to inform perceptions of punishment and reform. Its legacy demonstrates how confinement alone cannot replace education, therapeutic support, or structured personal growth. Comparing the three institutions highlights a continuum of correctional philosophy. Alcatraz represents the historical control model. Rikers reflects contemporary challenges in urban jail reform. San Quentin exemplifies long-term, structured rehabilitation within a high-security setting. The broader question remains: how can urban jails like Rikers balance security, overcrowding, and public accountability while delivering effective rehabilitation? The answer is complex, requiring coordination across education, mental health, and vocational domains. And yet, individual stories reveal potential. Inmates who engage with programs, maintain stability, and receive guidance often demonstrate measurable improvements, suggesting that even within restrictive systems, rehabilitation is possible. What follows challenges conventional assumptions about who benefits from prison programs and how success should be measured. Few outside observers grasp the full complexity of implementing reform in real time, under pressure, and under scrutiny. San Quentin's rehabilitation model extends beyond traditional academics and vocational training. Inmates are encouraged to participate in restorative programs that emphasize accountability, personal reflection, and community responsibility. Peer mentorship has become a central feature. Individuals who have completed programs often guide newcomers through coursework, therapy sessions, and structured activities, creating continuity and reinforcing positive behavior. Cognitive behavioral interventions address patterns of thought and behavior linked to criminal activity. By examining decision-making processes, inmates develop tools to respond differently to stress and conflict. Substance abuse treatment is integrated into daily life. Programs combine group therapy, individual counseling, and medical oversight, acknowledging addiction as a factor in both incarceration and recidivism. The combination of education, skill development, and therapeutic intervention represents a holistic approach. Inmates gain not only qualifications, but also the capacity for self-regulation and structured decision-making. Rikers Island has attempted similar integration, but structural and population pressures limit implementation. High turnover means individuals may enter programs midway or leave before completing coursework, reducing overall impact. Despite these challenges, incremental successes exist. Detainees who engage with education and counseling demonstrate improved behavior, reduced conflict, and more positive interactions with staff and peers. Vocational skills, even when partially acquired, increase employability post-release. City initiatives link certain certifications with local employers willing to hire formerly incarcerated individuals, providing tangible incentives. Mental health support remains critical. Structured therapy within Rikers focuses on crisis management, coping strategies, and emotional regulation. Programs strive to maintain consistency despite logistical disruptions caused by court appearances or security measures. Alcatraz, while operational, relied on rigid routines rather than personal development. Prisoners performed labor and adhered to strict rules, with privileges contingent on obedience rather than skill acquisition or personal growth. The contrast between Alcatraz and modern facilities demonstrates an evolution in correctional philosophy. Rehabilitation has shifted from peripheral concern to central purpose, though outcomes remain uneven across institutions. San Quentin's success illustrates the potential of sustained programs. Inmates engaged in education and therapy show measurable reductions in disciplinary infractions and higher rates of employment after release. Community involvement reinforces these gains. Nonprofit organizations, university programs, and volunteer mentors bridge institutional programs with external opportunities, easing reintegration into society. Programs also prioritize personal responsibility. Inmates participate in restorative justice sessions and conflict resolution workshops, fostering accountability and self-reflection as part of rehabilitation. Yet obstacles persist. Security incidents, staffing shortages, and administrative constraints can interrupt programming, delaying progress and requiring rapid adaptation by staff and participants alike. At Rikers, initiatives such as the Fresh Start educational program and vocational tracks in culinary arts or maintenance attempt to replicate similar outcomes. Participation has increased, but results remain limited by systemic instability. Specialized housing units allow for focused instruction, but overcrowding often undermines these efforts. Units intended for small groups are frequently filled beyond capacity, straining staff and reducing program effectiveness. The reality is complex. Even well-designed programs struggle in environments dominated by immediate security concerns, frequent transfers, and short-term stays. Outcomes are unpredictable and often measured in incremental improvements. Nevertheless, there are stories of transformation. Inmates who persist in education, therapy, and skill building often leave Rikers better prepared for employment, stability, and reduced likelihood of reoffending. San Quentin's model reinforces the principle that extended engagement and structured programming correlate with lower recidivism. Long-term commitment to learning, combined with personal development, provides a framework for measurable success. Alcatraz serves as a historical benchmark, demonstrating how confinement without support limits opportunities for change. Its legacy continues to inform debates about security, control, and rehabilitation in contemporary prisons. Comparisons across the three institutions reveal the essential tension. Security must be maintained, but reform requires consistent access to education, therapy, and vocational training. The balance is delicate and ongoing. Ultimately, the experience of inmates in these facilities highlights both the possibilities and the limits of rehabilitation within the U.S. correctional system. Policy, infrastructure, and program design converge to shape outcomes. And the most pressing question remains: how can urban jails like Rikers sustain meaningful programs under conditions of constant turnover, chronic overcrowding, and persistent public scrutiny? The answer will shape the lives of thousands, determining whether incarceration produces cycles of recidivism or opportunities for genuine transformation. At San Quentin Rehabilitation Center, the shift toward structured reform has required measurable benchmarks. Administrators track educational enrollment, program completion rates, and post-release employment outcomes to evaluate long-term effectiveness. Data from California indicates that inmates who complete college-level coursework are significantly less likely to return to custody within 3 years of release. Education functions as both skill development and cognitive restructuring. Vocational pathways extend beyond classroom theory. Training in coding, media production, and skilled trades aligns with current labor market demands, increasing the likelihood of stable employment after incarceration. Stable housing units within the facility support this model. Smaller group living arrangements reduce tension, encourage accountability, and create environments more conducive to sustained learning. Rehabilitation also incorporates restorative practices. Structured dialogues and victim awareness programs emphasize responsibility, aiming to connect actions with consequences in a controlled, educational setting. These initiatives do not eliminate security concerns. San Quentin remains a state prison with strict protocols, perimeter control, and classification systems that determine housing and movement. But the philosophical emphasis has shifted. Rehabilitation is no longer peripheral. It is presented as central to institutional purpose, influencing policy decisions and daily operations. Rikers Island presents a more complex landscape. As a jail primarily holding individuals awaiting trial, its population changes rapidly, complicating long-term program delivery. City officials have announced plans to close Rikers and replace it with smaller borough-based facilities. The proposed model emphasizes modern design, increased programming space, and improved oversight. Whether those facilities will fully resolve systemic issues remains uncertain. Structural reform requires not only new buildings, but consistent staffing, funding, and accountability mechanisms. Mental health initiatives at Rikers continue to expand. Specialized housing units provide targeted treatment, and partnerships with local agencies attempt to ensure continuity of care after release. However, oversight reports have repeatedly documented challenges related to safety and staffing shortages. Rehabilitation efforts operate within a system under constant public scrutiny. Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary offers a historical counterpoint. Its closure in 1963 reflected logistical and financial realities, but also symbolized the limits of isolation as a correctional strategy. The federal government shifted toward institutions that balance security with broader programming. Over time, the Bureau of Prisons incorporated educational and vocational elements more systematically across facilities. Alcatraz's legacy endures as a cultural symbol of strict confinement. Yet modern correctional philosophy increasingly acknowledges that isolation alone does not address the factors contributing to criminal behavior. Across these three institutions, the evolution of prison reform reflects broader societal debates about accountability, public safety, and second chances. Policies change in response to research, litigation, and public pressure. Recidivism statistics remain a central metric. States invest in programs that demonstrate measurable reductions in reoffending, linking funding decisions to empirical outcomes. Community reentry planning has become integral. Coordination between prisons, probation departments, and social service providers determines whether skills learned inside translate into stability outside. Employment remains one of the strongest predictors of successful reintegration. Facilities that provide certifications aligned with industry standards contribute to smoother transitions. Yet rehabilitation does not operate in isolation from social conditions. Housing availability, access to health care, and economic opportunity all influence whether former inmates sustain progress. San Quentin's structured approach demonstrates that sustained programming can reduce institutional misconduct and support post-release success. Rikers illustrates the difficulty of implementing reform within a high-turnover urban jail. Alcatraz reminds observers of an era when punishment overshadowed development. Its history underscores how correctional systems have gradually redefined their objectives. The path forward depends on balancing security with opportunity. Effective reform requires investment, oversight, and a commitment to evidence-based practices. Ultimately, the question is not whether prisons can offer rehabilitation, but whether systems are structured to make that rehabilitation consistent and accessible. For those inside, the difference determines whether incarceration becomes a temporary interruption or a recurring chapter. For communities outside, it shapes public safety and long-term social stability. If this story kept you watching, the next one will stay with you even longer. Subscribe for more real prison documentaries.